So a relative XPath is nice because it is a much cleaner way to identify elements and it is more stable. So the beauty of that is you usually identify the element once using relative XPath, and then you don't have to worry about that element again changing locations depending on how you identify. But it's a very nice thing to have because you wouldn't have to worry about the element changing positions and so on and so forth. With its nice relative XPath, it will be very stable. Similar to relative and absolute folder paths, if any of you are familiar with those. Right, an absolute folder path gives you the exact location of the file. A relative folder path gives you the location of the file relative to something else. Right, you may be in one folder and it will say go up 2 folders and then go inside this other folder, rather than always being located on the full absolute path. The only problem with relative XPath is that it takes more time to find the correct identifier using relative techniques. But after we're done with this lesson, you guys are going to be so amazing that you guys won't mind doing it. And so a relative XPath might look something like this. So if I want, for example, this button, rather than doing all of this, I'm going to remove all that. All right, so it would be something like this. See that? If I hit enter, it highlights this button that I want. And if I wanted button 1, I can have button 1. You guys see that? Compare that to the absolute XPath, and you can right away see what's much cleaner and easier to use. Not only that, it's much easier to understand where this is pointing to, right? As opposed to something like this, like where the hell is this element pointing to? I have no idea. So relative XPath is where we're going to spend most of our time focusing and really mastering this skill. And once we're mastered with XPath identification, you guys will be so good and at the top of your game, ready to identify any elements anytime using any tool, especially with Selenium WebDriver. So just like any kind of location language, there are a few expressions that you guys need to know in order to get more familiar and understand XPath better. So here I have created some tables. I got them all from W3 Schools, and you guys can obviously get more detail there if you want, but I don't think after this it'll be necessary. I'm going to teach you guys, as always, the most essential things to become amazing automation engineers without wasting your time on things that you don't need at all. So anyways, there is this /, and that's used to navigate to the next element in the tree, and it selects from the root node. So for example, if we go all the way up in our HTML document here, you guys see this? This right here, document, that is the root node. So if I start with document, and then I put a / there, that's what it does, right? It doesn't select anything. And then if I step into the HTML, excuse me guys, don't start with the document node, start with the HTML node, okay? So this is the root, and then if I put a / here, and you guys can see that this HTML node has what we call 2 children. We have the head and we have the body. These 2 guys are called siblings. So if we want to navigate to see what's in the head, we can put head here, and then Firebug selects it. Or we can go inside the body. Look, if I put body here, see that how it selected the body? And now we can dig into the body's children if we want. So if you guys see that I expanded the body. Now if I want, I can dig into a div. So if I put a / here and do a div, it's going to select all of the divs that are the children of this body. So you guys see, this is a hierarchy. This is the parent, and then this is the child of the HTML node, and then this guy is the child of this body node. But there are many of these guys, so all of them get selected because there are many divs inside of this body. And so we can keep navigating like this. See that? As deep as we want until, you guys see that? How I'm narrowing down until we get to the place that we want. And you guys can see how extensive that is, but this is how you form the absolute path. And that's like that absolute address that you know, but you want to visit a family, right? You want to visit your friends, and they live at a certain address. You don't have their phone number, but you know where they live. And one day you go to visit them, and those friends have moved. And because you only know their absolute address, you won't know how to track them down. So that's what that / is for. Now, you guys see how annoying that is, right? So if I wanted to get down to this footer, I can use this /, which selects a node in the document from the current node that matches selection, no matter where they are. So that kind of just lets me skip anything I want. So if I want to get to the footer, I just have to put / here, and boom, I'm at the footer, right? If I want to get to a div, I put a / and then hit div, and it's going to select all of them. And you guys can see what's happening on the page. It's selecting all the divs. If I want to get, for example, to this title tag, I just do this, title, and it highlights that title. But if it was just a single /, that's not possible because I need to do body, and then so on and so forth. I need to dig in one by one HTML, then I need to do body, and then I need to dig down all the way until I get to the title. But if I don't want to do that and I just want to get directly to the title, / allows me to skip. If I want to get, let's see, to this Xpath button, to an input tag, right? You guys see here how it ends. If I want to bypass all of this crap right here, put another /, hit enter. Now you guys can see the problem that it's selecting all of the input tags, and right now there are 2, but that's okay. At least we skipped all of that crap, and now we kind of filtered down, and based on this we can dig in to where we want, whether we want to hit this button or this button. So that's what the /, / does. It allows us to skip to a certain tag no matter where it is in the HTML structure. All right, so we don't really need to worry about the periods too much, the dots. I don't really use them too often. They just help you to work with the nodes. However, what is important is this @ symbol, which helps you to select attributes. You guys remember attributes in HTML are things that look like this, right? This body and whatever. So let's scroll up here and work with this link. You guys see how this link has an attribute right here, which is an ID, and then it has a value. So actually, when I clicked on this link, the XPath that was created for me using FirePath inside of Firebug is perfect. So, right, look what it did. It went through all of the tags. I don't even need that dot there. Went through all of the tags. And then regardless of what that tag was, that's what this star symbol means. Inside of these brackets, we can specify an attribute, which is ID, and ask for its value, like that. If you supplied something that doesn't exist, like this, and hit enter, it doesn't select anything. But something that's correct with an ID of simple elements link, that works. You guys see that? If I wanted a different attribute like href, and you guys can see all of this is inside of the opening tag, right? So if I copy this href, and then instead of ID, it's going to be href, okay? And then this, I can supply that value and hit enter. it selects the same thing, but just using a different property. You guys see that? If I wanted to work with this clickable icon, we can look at the HTML right here, right? And it is what? A tag, which means it's a link. And then it has a target attribute, an href attribute, and then it has some text inside of it. I will use this href and call it icon success, copy over that. And so we'll replace all of this, remove all of that stuff, and the attribute is href. And then the value of that href is this. And then we'll hit enter, and it selected two things. You guys see that, right? This one and this one, which is cool because both of them have an href of icon success. And yes, that's possible. Our identifier doesn't care what tag it is. That's why there's this wild character here. And then for that tag, it sets these parameters, which is a href of icon success. But we have two of those. So how can we pick the one we want? Is we can probably pick the first one like that, and that still doesn't help us. We can probably go to the parent, and instead of a div, we can do the h4. So here, instead of the star, is going to be h4, and then for the h4, inside of that there lives a, so we need to do a /a, and now hit enter, and that selects only our clickable icon text. You guys see that? Because we dug to the parent, and inside of the parent there lives a child called a tag, and that a tag we want to use it href icon success. Otherwise, if we wanted to get to this guy, we can use a div here, div. Inside of the div we have an a that lives, and then the a has some properties as well. See that? And now using this hierarchy we were able to pinpoint one of these elements. So here I have a few examples about everything that we talked about, and what I quickly wanted to show is these last two, right? With these two slashes, it doesn't matter what the tag is, but we can skip everything and select the tags that we want. So if I scroll down here to this table, right? So this table, for example, if we look at a cell here, it has a TD. Inside of a TD lives some text. Here, check out another TD where some text lives and another TD. Table data. And the table data lives inside of a TR, which is the table row. So if I wanted to select all of the table rows, anyone know how I would do that? Well, so first I would put these double slashes, right? Because we don't care. We want to skip all of the parent structures and just get right down to the element that we want. And that would just be by putting TR here. And if I hit enter, check it out. It selects every single table row. That's what TR stands for, table row. If I wanted the table body, I can do that. And now it selects every single table data that there is on this page. You guys can see it selected every single TD tag. If I wanted a specific one, that's a little different question. But for now, this is how you use these double forward slashes. And now if I wanted all of the attributes like class, I can do something like this. So now it's going to select every single class attribute on this page. If I hit enter, it selected them. If I wanted every single ID, check it out. See how it's selecting every single ID? If I wanted every single, how about href, which is our link href. You guys see that? It's selecting every single link. So using this double slash and the @ symbol and whatever attribute you want, you can select exactly, you can select all of the attributes. And then obviously we already went over this wildcard character just like anywhere else. It matches any element node, and then this matches any attribute node. So let's take a look at that. So any element node, that's how I was doing this. Right, so if I hit enter now, what is it going to do? It's going to select everything on the page. You guys see that? But then if I wanted to do that and then just skip to a certain attribute, maybe I can do something like type. That's not going to work. It needs to do like that. Type, all the types. And then if I do like this, it's going to select every single attribute on the page. You guys see that? Selects every single attribute on the page. So you can use the star to skip through the HTML to get to the point where you want. It's that awesome wildcard character that we use everywhere else in all, even in coding. And then finally, I also want to talk about the pipe, which can allow us to select multiple elements. So for example, if you go back to this table and I look at this table, I can select all of the TDs, right? Check it out, all of the table data, and I can select all of the TRs, table rows and table data. Or I can select all of the TDs and just the table headers. You guys see that? Instead of the table data, how about I just select the table rows? Table rows and table headers. You guys see that? How it's not only selected here, all the THs and all of the TRs are selected. You guys see that? How cool is that? So that's what the pipe does. So for the next few lectures, I want to take a lot of time to get you guys really familiar with Xpath. I want to take you through all different scenarios, from simple to really complicated, so that you can understand how to identify any element at any time for any condition. And after we go through a bunch of those exercises, then we can jump into Visual Studio and try out a few other things, because the easiest thing after learning Xpath is actually using it in Visual Studio, because once you know how to identify elements, the rest is pretty much irrelevant. It's the same thing as we have been doing before. So let's start with a button element, and I would like to go through a few strategies on locating it. So if we go up and try to look at this button, okay, come up here. So this is the initial XPath that is given to me, right? It's long, dirty, and hard to understand. If we wanted to fix this up, we can look at this element down here and see, what does it have? Well, it has a class name, right? So let's try using a class name. So you can obviously just use that in Selenium WebDriver and use finds by class name, or you can come here, remove all of this. Remember, class is the attribute, and then just apply its value. Hit enter, and it almost worked, right? You guys see how it almost worked? Because now it's highlighting two buttons, because both of these buttons have class name, which leads me back to the class example when I told you guys sometimes it may be unique, other times it may not. So that's when we need to decide on how to identify the element. So as you can see, class name is not sufficient enough to pick us the right element. So what we have to do is probably use the text of the class name that tells us to pick this as opposed to this, right? The text in here is go to login page, and the text in here is click me. You guys see that? So let's put those identifiers in here. Put this on the side. Put that here. Oh, by the way, guys, this is also a link, as you can see. So you can just use Selenium's link text in order to click it, right? So you can use this. Link is equal to click me. Or you can use one of my favorite techniques, which is using contains text to click on the button that you need. So if I do this and then hit enter, it selects only this button. Let's go down. You guys see that? It doesn't select this button anymore. It selects only this button. And this is actually one of my favorite techniques to identifying some elements, and you guys should get really familiar with it. And this statement right here, let's break it down. So we have our double /, which obviously selects any tag in the body, and we drill down to the A tag. And for the A tag, we want to use two XPath functions. This guy and this guy are actually XPath functions that tell us what we want. So we want to use the XPath function that says contains And what does it contain? It contains text that says click me. Text that says click me. You guys see that? And this is one of my favorite tools for identifying all the different types of buttons, because a lot of times elements won't get those unique identifiers as you guys see here, and so you can actually identify it by text. Yes, it sucks when the text changes, but you just have to update the text, and a lot of times the text does not change. If you want to, for example, click the email me button, you just change the text to email me, like this. And then if I hit enter, that did not work. Why didn't it work? Let's see. Because, first of all, it's not, the email me is not inside of the A. You guys see that? It's not inside of the A. It's inside of the span. So, if we come here and paste this, and then instead of the A, we make it a span, right? That's this guy right here, span. See that? And then in here we put the text, email. It doesn't even have to be the full thing. And I hit enter, boom. Now I got what I want to click on. You guys see that? Just by changing the text. And it's really nice because you can pass in any string, and as long as it contains that string, you can click on that element. So now you guys saw 3 different strategies to identifying this button. We saw this one where we can use the link text, which is equal to click me. We can use this guy, and we can use this guy. So probably overall, the best strategy to do here is to use link text because it's the most simple one. But again, that's always up to you to decide it. But when you look at all of this written out versus this, to me, much simpler to just use by.link text, and then you just pass in the link text, right? Now let's analyze a link. Let's come over here and hover over this link. And what you can see right away is that FirePath gives me this Xpath, which is pretty excellent because we have an ID. An ID, like I said, is always the best because it means that the element is unique. So we can use Selenium WebDriver to do by.id and just apply this value. That's right there. You can also use our favorite contains text function. And again, it's not my favorite here because it's too long for our purposes. This has an ID. Might as well just use it. But if we wanted to, we just put that in here and then we hit enter, and you guys see still identifies this link. And then obviously you can do by Xpath and just pass in the exact string that our original FirePath query displayed, which is this. And looking at all of these again, you can see that the most simple one is ID. So you just do by.id and then you just supply the value like that, and that's it. You don't have to try to figure out an XPath. If you got an ID, take it. Next, let's talk about an icon. Have you guys worked with icons before? If you have and you've had trouble, now you will learn how to do it. So, looking at this clickable icon, this is the initial path that is given to me. So I'll put that here. What else can we do here? Well, we see this has a class, right? So let's try using the class. So how would we do that? Remember, class is an attribute. So if we get rid of all this, and we don't care what tag it is, that's why there's that star there, but we do care that it's a class and that it has a value of this guy. And then we hit enter and it still maintains. The question is, does anything else have a class like this in here? I don't think so. And so we can do that, use this. And obviously, you can do the by.className and then just pass in the value. And again, that is what I would probably use just because it's the most simple and you don't really have to do too much extra work. Let's talk about fields and web edits and how to work with those. So I got two fields here that we can fill out, and I can click in here, and right away you can see that the XPath given to me contains an ID. Excellent. So we can use that XPath, right? And I wouldn't complain about this just because it has an ID. As if it has an ID, we can obviously use the ID value to pass into the WebDriver, doing something like by.id, just like that. And also, I mean, that's about it. If it has an ID, that's great. If you want to get complicated, right, I can show you guys how to get complicated. If you want to get to the P level, so rather than a star, let's put a P here. And inside, if I hit enter now, that doesn't select anything, right? So let me copy this over, go back to here. So if inside of the P, we have an input living. So input, and the input has an ID that's there. So if I hit enter, that works exactly as required. But why is that necessary? That's just extremely complicated, over-engineered, and we don't need that at all. Therefore, something like this, with a star, of course, works just as well, except it's not over-engineered, just a simple query. So I would just simply use the identifier. Don't make your life harder if you don't need to do it. Just use the simple identifier. Selenium provides us for this. Just pass in the value, and that's it. Email field. Let's look at the email field. Same thing. It has an ID. Use the ID. No problem. Alrighty, my friends. Let's talk about radio buttons. Alright, radio buttons, checkboxes. All of you guys love them and hate them at the same time because they are a pain in the butt. We have some radio buttons here, and if we take a look at them, take a look. First of all, to check each of these items is their own elements. But not to mention, we also need to care about the text that is directly to the right of them, right? But how do you check the appropriate box and read the text in order to make that happen? So if I wanted to click on this one, I Love Quick Test Pro button, you can see the HTML. So we have a form. You guys see the form highlighted above in blue? This is our form. Inside of the form, we have several inputs. So we have input 1, input 2, and input 3. Just radio. This is the radio button. You can see it's type radio. So it's a radio button. And then it has a value. How cool is that? Right? So we can use that, for example, to select our appropriate radio button. And also, it has another attribute called checked, meaning that is it checked or not. So the other buttons, for example, I Love Selenium Webdriver, has checked equals to checked. The other ones do not because they are not checked. And when they are checked, that is how you will be able to know which button is checked or not. So if I wanted to select the second one, that I Love Quick Test Pro, which I don't anymore, I can use type radio, and it has a value, I Love Quick Test Pro, right? Or even better, we could probably do something like this, and then do add value equals what? I Love Quick Test. Let's hit enter, and that did not work. Let me copy this over and let's see why it did not work. So that didn't work because add value, I Love Quick Test. Let's add an input. Oh, it's I Love Quick Test Pro, and I forgot the Pro, and so of course there is no value with I Love Quick Test. There is a value with I Love Quick Test Pro. It's not a wildcard character here. So I Love Quick Test Pro, you guys see how that works? And so therefore that allows me to select the I Love Quick Test Pro button. And of course, if you just wanted, to do like a wildcard character, you guys can do the at contains text. I love quick test in there, and then if it contains that text, right, it's going to select it. But with the value attribute, you cannot do that because it has to be the exact full string. And so that's how we can identify this radio button. And if we check it, check out the HTML below, which needs to reload. Oh, and it was not checked, and I apologize. I'm no HTML expert, but now I remember that this actually means that this radio button is going to be checked by default anytime that the page loads. So that's why it has the checked equals checked. So sometimes you may not want to use the text of a radio button to identify it, right? You may just want to identify the radio button based on its order. And that is pretty easy to do. So all you have to think about is what is the type of the radio button. In this case, it's input, 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 right? So let's get all of the inputs on this page, which you do like that. And if I hit that, it gets me a bunch of the inputs, right? It gets me things that I don't need. So in order to filter those out, let's look at the radio buttons again. They are of type radio, which is of interest to me because it will eliminate everything except the radio buttons. So I'm going to put input and then type equals radio. And then if I hit enter, see that? It only selects the 3 radio buttons. So now, if I wanted to select the first one, I can just put a bracket here, put a 1, and hit enter. And we'll have the selected first radio button. It starts at 1, not at 0, unlike all other programming languages. 2 would select me that, and 3 would select me that. 0, there is no 0, so it doesn't select me anything. So remember, starts at 1, and that allows me to select the first button. So that's how we do it here in Xpath. Let's go back to our Visual Studio and do that there as well. So here, I already typed out the code for how to use Xpath in order to identify our elements. So you can see we use the simple by class, right? By.xpath, and then we just put in our query that we want, right? Which is what we retrieved exactly from FirePath. So just put that in, we find the element, and then we click it, and then that's about it. We don't really even need the back because it's not going to do anything. So let me save this, make sure that nothing else is uncommented, and then we can actually go ahead and run it and see it select our radio button. So I'm just going to right click here and then do run unit tests. It's going to start running. Here comes our window. And I should have paused it for you guys to see. Let's do that again. Cool. So it selected our radio button using this locator here. All right, you can see it returned an element with all of these properties. And now if we click it, let's scroll down. Right now the first one is selected. This one, actually let's select the second one, so because this is going to select the first one, so I want to show you guys that it selects the second one. And if we just do a step over, you guys can see how it clicked the first radio button. Pretty awesome, right? So there's one other concept, new concept that I want to bring up for you guys, which we have not dealt with before because it was not possible in the IDE. And that is the concept of returning a list of iWeb elements. So when we put this query into our FirePath and hit enter, do you guys see what it selects? It selects, right, the 3 radio buttons. And that's good to know because we can have multiple elements returned to our object in Selenium WebDriver. And using this right here is exactly how we do it. So we have our locator, And this locator is going to return us 3 elements. And those elements, rather than being stored in a variable like this, they are now going to be stored in an iList of iWeb elements, right? An iList, it's an interface for a list with a bunch of iWeb element types inside of it. And we're going to call that elements. The other thing to notice here is that rather than using the find element method that we've been using here, we're using the find elements because we realize that it's going to return us multiple elements when we put this in. Let's run this and take a look at how that object looks once we're done with it. Excellent. So if I do a step over here and then scroll up and we hover over this elements, you guys can see that there are a total count of 3 elements inside of this iList. And if we expand that, you guys can see, just like in our fire path, we can use these brackets to select which element that we want. So for example, if I come over here to the watch and I do elements and then put brackets 0 and hit enter, it only looks at the first iWeb element returned from into this iList. And you guys get why it's 0, right? Because in C#, a list, any collection is populated from 0 index. And in Xpath, it starts with 1. So just keep that in mind. But we are populating this C# iList, which starts at 0. And so you can see that this element, the first one, can be identified by 0. And if we want to hover over here and expand this and expand that, we can see that this element is tag name input. And then if we, for example, want to click it, let me bring this over. By the way, you guys see how this is always checked every time you open a fresh browser? That's because of that checked property. Checked equals checked. So if I do this, and then I come in here, and I can do that click. Oh yeah, that won't work because you cannot convert it to a group. But what you can do is, using these elements, you can now circle through them and do stuff with them, like click the first one, or click the second one, or check to see if an element contains text using this text property, but it doesn't have anything because it doesn't have any text. But so now you can get this collection and you can work with this collection and do whatever you need depending on the element that you want. So this is new, but it's going to be used throughout a lot of our lectures to help you guys better work with Selenium objects. All right, ladies and gents, how about we work on some advanced controls like opening a toggle. So if you come over here and you see a toggle here and you click on it, here's what we get in the HTML. By the way, let me actually show you what it does. So if I click on it, see that? It opens up this text that we can read. So to click on it, you guys see it has a class. So let's use that class and see if it gets us the right identifier. Remove all that. Class equals. Excellent. So it does work for us. We can use a class to identify this toggle. Now, if there were 2 toggles that I created, they would probably have this same class, and then that would not work, and then you would need to use some other identifier to open and close this toggle. But in the meantime, it works. And then you can use that to read the text that's in here. All right, so you can see that text lives inside of the toggle, and then once it's open, it's a p tag, and inside of there, there's some text. Now, how about tabs? You guys see these tabs over here? So if I click on this one, this is tab 2. If I click on this one, this is tab 1. See how the text changes there and how the tabs actually become black when they're selected? So how can you click on the appropriate tab? Well, let's take a look. So if we use our Firebug to highlight here, you can first of all see that it has a link and it has text inside. It's called tab 2, and it has an href, which is just a hashtag. And it's also a class of etpt tab active. How about this other one that's not active? Has a like class of blank, and then its href is this. So if we want to click on tab 1, we can do something like an A, and then it contains text, open, close brackets, text, comma, and the string, and we'll put that in here, tab 1. Make sure you close this bracket here, square bracket, hit enter, and it's selected. If we want to select container 2 or tab 2, just hit tab 2, that's selected. And we can probably even take it a step further and not require the A and just give it a star. And that actually makes it even better, more stable, because we're not dependent on having the A tag there. It can be any tag, and as long as it contains tab 2, we're happy. Or tab 1, that'll also work. And you can even decide if a certain tab is active by doing something like an li. So do that, and then inside of that, we have our A living, right? So if we hit enter here, that did not work. Now, why is that, guys? Can anyone figure out why it doesn't work? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's because tab 1, which we have here, is not active. It's tab 2 that is active. See that, how it works? Because tab 2 has this class and it's active. Tab 1 is not, so it does not work. So using Selenium WebDriver, we can just check to see, for example, if this web element is returned. If not, then we know that it's not active. And that's how we can decide which tab to click, or even better, we can just click on the appropriate tab, whether it's active or not. And so that's how you work with tabs. And then whenever you open one up, you can go inside and just read the text. All right, so I think you guys are getting pretty awesome at using Xpath to identify elements. So I'm going to switch it up on you and get a little bit more complicated. And I want to talk to you guys about HTML tables. They are fun to work with if you like a challenge, and really annoying and frustrating sometimes whenever you can't get what you need out of them. So, and I'm talking about these exact HTML tables right here. So if we grab our handy Firebug and take a look, you guys can see that we have multiple different cells, and actually these cells live inside of rows. And this whole thing right here, this table itself, you guys can see is a table, right? Let's open up this HTML. And inside of this whole table, we have a body. And inside of that body, we have rows, row 1, 2, 3, 4. Inside of the rows, we may have headers, or we may have table data. Okay? Headers, table data. So you guys can see that in order to access this table and get what you need out of it, it can get a little bit hectic sometimes. So let's go back to OneNote and learn a little bit about HTML tables. So HTML tables have a table tag, opening and closing table tag. And inside of that is everything that is going to live related to that table. So when I hover over here, you guys can see that this table tag is what identifies everything inside of my table. Inside of that table, we have some body tags, right? And that represents the table body. So if I expand here, you guys can see that I have a body tag inside of which we have living all of the cells. Inside of the body, you can have table rows. So you have a start row tag and an end row tag, right? And those TRs, tr table row. When I hover over them, you guys can see what that represents, right? So inside of a table, we have a body. Inside of the body, we have rows. Okay, row 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then inside of the rows, you guys can have either headers for th. You guys see that on top? Headers. Or you can have table data. So 1, 2, 3. If I add another TD here, it would come out here. If I add a TD5, it would be over here. So that's represented in here. So we have our TRs, and inside of the TRs, we have our TDs that hold the data. Okay? And so that continues for as many rows as you want. I have 4. If I wanted to add a 5th one, you just add a 5th one. And then inside of that row, you can place some table bodies. Or you can even place a table header if you want to get a little bit crazy. It doesn't matter. But so that's the structure of a table. And you guys can see how it may get a little bit complicated, right? For example, if I want to know what salary a software development engineer in test can make, then somehow I have to locate the row in which the software development engineer in test lives, and then based on the column header, I will locate the salary. If I want to know how much an automation testing architect makes, I need to locate the row in which the automation testing architect lives, and then get that row, and then find the header of the variable that I want, in which case it's salary, and then based on the row and the column, I can find the exact value that I need. So it gets a little bit tricky, and let's go inside of Visual Studio to better understand it. All right, so as normal, we should always start with the very generic, the largest parent, and then narrow in on exactly what we want. So I'm going to take you guys step by step through this process of dealing with the HTML table in Selenium WebDriver. So the very first thing to do is to store the table, the whole table, inside of an element. And luckily, our table has an ID, right? It is right here, table with an ID, HTML table ID. So all you have to do is use the by.id with HTML table ID, and then store that inside of a table variable. So let's do a run up to here. Already had a test running, that's why it was complaining. So what you guys don't see is on my other screen, Chrome is coming up, and within a few seconds, the page should load. And now we are here. I'm going to step over this, usually using F10, but because I have a screen capture software, that's going to stop my screen capture software. So instead I use these buttons on top, F10, which is pretty annoying to me because you guys know I love shortcuts, but it's what I have to do. Anyway, so now you can see that inside of this table variable, we have a HTML table. And so you can see the tag name, you can see the text, which is basically all of the table data and headers separated by new line characters and spaces. And that is our table living in a single element. Okay, and we got it with an ID, which is nice. If a table does not have an ID like this one, that's a different story, and we'll deal with that after. So let's bring this back up here. You can take it and drag it. I want to drag it over here. And now the next step would be, once we have the table, we want to get a collection of all the rows inside of the table. Can anybody think of how we do that? To get a collection of all the rows inside of the table. Well, we have our table, right? Missed a single quote. We got our table, right? And now we just need to dig in to get its rows. Inside of that, there's also a table body, right? What is that going to select me? Excellent. And inside of the table body, we have the table rows. So what if I do this? Boom. It selects every single table row. You guys see how that worked? I did not care about the tag. I used the ID of the table to get me down to the right table. Then I went inside of that to get to the body, and then I went inside of that to get to the table row. We can probably even eliminate this, and you do something like that to get all the table rows. But I think it's a little bit more clear for you guys if I do this. Same thing, but this is obviously a little bit cleaner. The other one is a little bit easier to understand. So if I uncomment this line over here, right, since we have 4 rows, we have to store them in a list rather than a single variable like we do here. In just the iWeb element is here, right? This find element, F12 it, find element, you guys see return type, iWeb element, right? And then find elements is going to return us all of the rows into a list, right? If I F12 to find elements, it returns a read-only collection of iWeb element. You guys see that? So when we want a collection of objects like we do here to get all of the rows, you use find elements and store that in a list, just like we did before with the radio buttons, because there are multiple radio buttons living inside of a single form. We got that form and then we took all the buttons from it. In the table, we can do the exact same thing. We get the table and we take whatever content we want from it and store it in a list of iWeb elements. All right, so let's go ahead and step over this line to see what happens to our collection of rows. I'm going to step over that as well. Scroll up a little bit, hover over this collection of rows, and you guys can see the count as 4, which is absolutely right. Correct, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows here. We can expand them and we can drill down into each one. You can see the very first one has title, work, and salary. The next one has software development engineer in test, automation, and $150,000, and so on and so forth for each of the rows. How cool is that? And all I did was just pass in the Xpath that we talked about into our find elements method, and that returned me a collection of iWeb elements into this variable. Cool, right? So let me go ahead and just run this through so it closes my browsers and cleans up. And now I have a fun challenge for you guys, which is usually what the problem that people face most of the time. And that is, what is the salary of an SDET, meaning software development engineer and test? What is their salary? If I was to ask you that and then ask you to write code in order to get that salary, how would you do it so that it's dynamic, right? So that if tomorrow the salary changes to $200,000, you'll still get that salary. Or maybe instead of a salary of an SDET, you want a salary of an automation testing architect. Or maybe you want to know the work that an automation testing architect does. It needs to be dynamic like that. Not just finding the value here, but you need to find this value based on this column and this row. Okay? So that is the problem that we're going to solve, and it will basically help us to combine all of the skills that we have learned so far into one final nice project. So let's take a look at this code here. The very first thing that I did was set up a few variables here. I set up a column index, a column counter, a constant called desired column header, right? So this is the column that we want. We want the salary, and then what is the desired value, which is the software development engineer in test. Okay, we want the salary of the software development engineer in test. And now we obviously need a loop, right? We can get a table, get all of the rows, and then based on that, we can figure out where this salary lives and where this lives as well. So let me uncomment this whole loop. Oh, by the way, guys, this is probably an amazing interview question where they check to see how you use logic to figure out a problem like that, right? So make sure you learn and understand everything that's going on here. So what we need to do is circle every single row in our collection of rows, right? So for every single row, we need to read every single cell and get its value. You guys see that? Read its cell and get its value. Once we figure out that we have software development engineer in test value, we need to note that row. And once we know this row and we know the header here, we can use the headers index, which is this number 3, and the rows index to figure out where this value lives. And as we step through the code, hopefully it would make more sense to you guys. This is all actually good. So let's take a look here at the code first, and then we'll step through it. So for every tr, right, row in our collection of rows.count, we're going to do a normal loop. We're going to increment, and we're going to start tr at 0. And the very first thing we need to do is set the row equal to collection of rows and then the index. So if we start at 0, this row variable is going to become our first row. In this case, it would be 0, which would be the headers row. Then as we circle to the next one, this guy would become this row, just so we know which row we're working on and we have that stored inside of a variable. Okay? So when we get that single row that we're going to work with for this loop iteration, we need to get all of the cells in that row. And to do that, so let's actually do that right now. So if we're looking at a row, so if we get this first row, right, we are in the first iteration of the loop. You guys see I put tr1 here. Now we're working with this row. How do we get all of its title headers? Well, that's simple. So you do the dot. And so now we found all of the table headers. But remember that the table headers only live in the first row. In the second row, we got table data that lives. So we need something better than this locator. Well, what if we just did a star here? Would that work? Of course it would. It would select it would select our first row, and then after that, whatever lives inside of that, it doesn't matter. It can be a star. Take a look at the second row. Boom. You guys see that? Selects every single cell inside of that. So over here, this is what our Xpath query does. In fact, we don't even need this dot here. And so this will get us all of the cells, right? So now we have the row, and inside of the row, we have every single cell.